This video explores the claims of the solar and wind power UK industry. In it, I do show simple calculations. I do it to prove the truth of my case. You don't have to follow the calculations, of course. You can just look at the conclusions. The calculations are there so that people can check me out, as it were. I've done many videos on the stupidity of these wind and solar green solutions to a problem that doesn't even exist, mind you. Wind and solar farms escape a lot of environmental scrutiny. In Wales here, if it's strategic, there is no environmental report. That's where I came across with a solar farm being put by an ancient woodland with lots of bat species, badgers, etc., all being ignored. It was that stupid that the developer actually told us that they'd done a look for badgers one afternoon and couldn't find any. That was the limit of their badger survey. There were lots of badger sets there and lots of obvious signs of badgers, but that didn't matter. No environmental study required. So I thought I'd start this video, because I'm an environmentalist and passionate about it, maybe with a little lesson from history about what happens when you ignore the environment and erect monuments. That's what's happening today. I'm taking wind here as the monument of today. And we're going to take a look at what happened at Easter Island. On Easter Island in the Pacific, there was a religious cult. The population were very fearful of the gods and had to be protected. Not dissimilar to today, with the scaremongering and the cult that has now become the climate change movement. On Easter Island, the population cut down all the trees in order to transport their stone monuments, so much so that after 900 such monuments there were no trees left, and what followed was an environmental disaster. I can't help feeling that the fact that we're not allowing for the cleanup of our wind and solar farms today, and after their very short lives, they too will become monuments to the stupidity of man. I don't think civilization seems to have made that much progress. If you just take a look at just the concrete bases that have to be removed when the wind vane is taken down, if you just look at the recycling problems of, say, wind vanes, and solar for that matter, you have an environmental disaster coming. In these calculations, I will show you that round about 72,000 acres of solar farms exist in the UK. All that is going to become a toxic waste, and we should at least be ensuring that all those solar farms and wind farms have built into their costs the cost of cleaning up after them. Well, this sequel is about the story behind the uncovering of this scandal, as it were, how it came about. And by me explaining this, I think you'll understand more about why it is a scandal. Now, Ofgem are the organisation, the government, if you like, the Quango, in charge of looking after consumer interests in energy in the UK. They totally fail in every area of this, and now they seem to be more interested in net zero than they are in protecting you, the consumer. One thing is very obvious from my investigations that you'll see is that the whole thing is covered in a fog. The lack of information, the misrepresentation of information is right throughout. So anyway, here's the story of how uncovering of this scandal came about, and in doing that, of course, I'll be explaining some of the basic technical details, but nothing in this involves more than simple arithmetic: addition, multiplication and division. Nothing more than that. We're going to first deal with solar farms, and in dealing with them you'll notice that they all say things like solar farm 50 megawatts, solar farm 72 megawatt, solar farm 20 megawatts. It's a meaningless figure, because that figure assumes that there's constant sunlight at the brightest level, like equatorial, directly onto the panel at the perfect angle 24 hours a day. Well, of course, that's not possible. So it shouldn't be saying 20 or 50 megawatts. It should be saying 20 or 50 megawatts with a little p afterwards. That is the panel. That is what's printed on the panel. But they don't. Here's an example of, let's say, Shotwick, which is the largest solar farm in the UK, I understand, and how the headline says 72.2, but the next line says 72.2 MWP, the little p. So first of all, you have to ignore that. If you want a rule of thumb, you're lucky to get 10% of that out. So if it says 50 megawatts, you're lucky to get 5. And domestically, you won't even get that. Domestically, you get roughly about a 12th out in the UK, and maybe get about 11% out in a farm. We'll deal with that in a minute. So that's the first figure, and I want you to understand how that represents how much energy is being produced. It really does. So when it says 50, think of it as 5, and now you're about the truth level, but we'll go into more detail. As a rule of thumb, let's look at what you actually get out domestically and with a solar farm from solar panels. Well, with the panels, say, of 1 kilowatt rating, you have a total of 1 kilowatt, in theory, you get the 24 times the 1, you get 24 kilowatt hours a day. But we actually get 2 kilowatt hours per day per kilowatt of panels. Now, that figure is an average right throughout the year. In the summer, you get a lot more. In the winter, you get a lot less. But the average throughout the year is about 2 kilowatt, and it's assuming you're facing south, well aligned, etc. So you get about a 12th out, which is 8.3% of the panel rating. With solar farms, they're more efficient because they have better angle normally, they are positioned better, optimized, and a good rule of thumb is 11% of the installed capacity. So 11% of that MWP figure I've explained. Of course, again, it varies. The south of England, for example, will give a higher rating, more power than, say, Scotland. So it varies as you go up. But overall, 11% is a good guide. The reason I'm doing this and having to explain this is because solar farms are very reluctant to reveal how much power they actually produce. It is quite difficult to get hold of how many megawatt hours a year they produce. So going forward then, where we can't find how much energy is produced from the solar farm per annum, as a guide, we take the panel rating, multiply it by 24 hours for the day, multiply by 365 days for the year. We take 11% of that to get the actual megawatt hours per annum. That's how you derive the actual output from the claimed MW figure or MWP figure that they give you. In order to find out how many homes they can supply, we need to know what the average consumption is, what the average energy requirement is of the average home. And actually, even this is fogged in sort of mystery. So let's first take a look at the Ofgem figures. This is lifted from the Ofgem website. Ofgem estimates the typical household in Britain uses 2,900 kilowatt hours of electricity and that is very important, 12,000 kilowatt hours of gas in a year. So that total is actually 14,900 kilowatt hours for the typical household. Now, if they use less gas, for example, if they don't have gas heating, they'll be using oil or even electric. So the equivalent is always being replaced. That is the total amount of energy for the typical home according to the government quango Ofgem. And this is the Ofgem published table with the 3 sizes of homes. The key point, of course, is that it is 80% gas being supplied to the homes with the 12,000 there, and 20% electric. So 4/5 of the power for the average home is being supplied by gas. This is important. That 80-20 rule applies right throughout, as we shall see. But apparently, not everyone uses Ofgem. Look at this statement here. it is estimated that for every 5 megawatts installed of solar farm, and they mean MWP by the way, will power 1,500 homes annually, based on an average annual consumption of 3,300 kilowatt hours, which is 3.3 megawatt hours. But we need 14.9 according to Ofgem. So this is how they fiddle it. They say things like this, but this 3.3 doesn't even agree with the 2.9 that Ofgem state. So where does that leave us? We'll take a look at this statement. The average electricity usage in the UK, how many kilowatt hours does your home use? Well, according to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BEIS, the average household uses 3.731 kilowatt hours per year. Well, not even the 3.3 we've just had, or the 2.9, so there is yet another figure. We've now got 3 different figures. That one is 3.73 megawatt hours, or it could be the 3.3 of previous, or it could be the 2.9. It depends on which one you take. And by the way, none of these calculations for the average home allow for the changeover from petrol and diesel to electric cars at home, changing the fuel type for transport. Just not allowed for. But then the plan is for you not to have a car. As indicated here, where the electric usage is 3.3 megawatt hours, then the gas usage is 13.2 megawatt hours. So the total there is 16.5 megawatt hours as opposed to the 14.9 stated by Ofgem. However, no matter which one of these you take, which one of these 3 different amounts of power for electricity you take for the average home, the constant factor is simply this. It is 20% electric of the total and 80% gas. That's to the nearest percentage, I've rounded off. But that is the constant factor. So if you're just supplying the 20%, no matter which one of these you take, you're just supplying 1/5 of the home's energy, leaving the rest to be supplied by gas. And to claim the number of homes based on that is deceptive, to say the least. They do not say we can supply 10,000 homes, providing 80% of the energy comes from gas, when the very people saying this are trying to do away with gas. In summary then, there are 3 different levels of electric use for the average home, but all of them assume 20% electric, 80% gas, and the totals to divide the power output by for any wind or solar farm is 14.9, 16.5 or 18.65 megawatt hours per year to get the number of homes. And because the solar farms do not actually tell us how many megawatt hours a year they produce, we've got a good idea, a good rule of thumb, to take 11% of the megawatt P value to get their output. Knowing those 2 things, we can cross-check just how they've calculated the number of homes. So before we go any further, we could stop at this point really to say that every single calculation they do is based on only the electric value, not the total energy for the house, only the electric value, leaving the 80% gas. So all of them are 500% out because they're only considering the one part. So when they quote the number of homes, which is the main point of my videos, they quote the number of homes based on 80% of that energy being supplied by gas. And that is misleading and shouldn't be allowed. And Ofgem should really wake up. Well, I think they have woken up, but they're the net zero people now. The whole idea is shadow and mist and confusion and deceit to forward the commercial gain, which is quite considerable. Solar farms often get 20% return, which is incredible. You know, that's why they can pay £1,000 an acre to farmers to a year to have them on their land, as it were. It is quite a good investment in those terms, but I'm afraid it's at your expense. Because of course every single solar or wind farm needs fossil fuel backup in the form of gas, and not only that, it needs open cycle gas which is much more inefficient, can burn 50% more gas because the open cycle can quickly adapt to the changing solar and wind. Anyway, I've covered that in other videos, so let's get back to the point here. Now, some people might say that I'm using the 11% rule, but justify it. Well, this is the next section. I'm going to justify it. And Shotwick, which apparently is the largest solar farm in the UK, does publish its megawatt hours, and so it provides us with a way of calculating its megawatt hours and comparing that to the theoretical megawatt hours for its megawatt p-value. So here goes. Shotwick has a panel rating of 72.2 megawatts. That's the panel rating. 68,900 megawatts was the actual production, which is 188 megawatt hours per day. The theoretical production is the 72.2 times the 24 hours in the day equals 1,732.8 megawatt hours. So the ratio of what you get out of that panel rating is simply 10.8%. Well, that's about the 11% we expected. And that's about what you get from solar farms in the UK, 11% of the advertised panel rating. Here we were able to get the exact figure because they gave us the number of megawatt hours they produce. I did manage to find the overall power output from the solar farms in the UK, the overall figure, and it's here, 13.92 terawatt hours. Wow, but that allows us, knowing what they claim in the gigawatt hours, which is really gigawatt P, notice they missed the P out there, that allows us to calculate the overall figure, the overall efficiency for the whole solar farm industry in the UK. So what's this going to work out as? Well, it's 11.04%. So just 0.04% different to our 11%. So it seems if you take the overall figure for the UK, 11% is very accurate. And it's a basis for assessing the actual amount of energy coming out of any solar farm when they give you those gigawatts, often missing out the p-value. Sorry, I cannot resist taking a little sidetrack here to see how much land is involved with those solar farms in the UK. But first of all, look at that 14.4 gigawatt figure, really gigawatt B, of course. That at 11% produces a rate of 1.58 gigawatts. But 14.4 sounds great, doesn't it? But how many acres of land do those solar farms actually occupy? Well, it's a rate of 5 acres per megawatt P claimed. That is 72,000 acres of land for a disruptive 1.58 gigawatts output. Nor can you blame any farmer for allowing it because they're paid a fortune, up to £1,000 an acre. That's a potential of £72 million rental every year for those 72,000 acres. But not to worry, you the public are paying for it. And by the way, that 72,000 acres of solar panels that we already have and growing is one incredible disposal problem, because the disposal of solar panels safely can cost as much, if not more, than the solar panel itself. And unless those solar farms have got a fund available to do that and clean up their waste in the future, they shouldn't be allowed to operate at all. In this next section, we're taking some solar farm examples to check how many homes they claim to supply and what the truth would be when we divide by those average home figures. They will vary because it's not clear what basis they're on. Where they say according to Ofgem, then we know the figure, but otherwise it varies all over the place. But this will give you some idea of what they're doing and how many homes they're claiming compared to what they actually do supply. Of course, the general principle that they're supplying just the electric part and not the gas part, and therefore not the whole of the house energy requirement, still applies. The first example we take is Owl's Hatch Solar Park at 51.9 megawatt P. It claims 14,000 homes. Luckily, Owl's Hatch did provide an amount of energy they produced last year, 49,305 megawatts. And so we are able to divide that by the 18.65 factor per home to give how many homes they supplied. It's 2,643, which is just 18.8% of their claimed 14,000. Well, let's go to the other extreme and use the off-gem. The off-gem per home was 14.9 megawatts per home, and that gave us 3,309 homes, so 23%. So between the two, 18.8 and 23, we are hovering around the 20%, totally justifying my assertions. Well, the next one, using the same calculations, you can freeze frame and check them all if you wish. We get the result of not 13,816 homes, but 3,724, which gives one of the higher outputs, actually, at 27% of the required energy for those homes. We're going to vary these things, no matter what, because they are all using slightly different bases. The point I'm trying to get across is it's still the 80-20 rule no matter what. And now we have the final one of our examples, Renton Park, at 50 MWP. And we do the normal calculation. It claims 12,000 homes, and on this calculation it actually supplies 2,583, and that comes out at 21.5% of the energy for the homes. You yourself can go forward and do these calculations and check any solar farm, and what you'll find is it's nothing like the number of homes they claim. So now let's check the Solar Trade Association here in the UK and what they're saying in their fact sheet. You know, the fact sheet to you, the consumers. And here it is. Well, here I'm only going to concentrate on the second point of their fact sheet concerning the number of homes they can supply with solar. It reads, for every 5 megawatt installed, that's 5 MWP to correct them, a solar farm will power 1,515 homes for a year and save 2,150 tonnes of CO2. Marvellous. Let's just fact check that. Well, 5 times 24, that's the 5 MW, times 365, times 11% of course, gives us 4,880 megawatt hours per year. But if we divide that by what we've been using, which is 4,118 over 18.65, we get 258 homes. We don't get the 1,515 homes. That is just 17% of the homes. Okay then, but let's take the 14.9 as per off-gem. And in that case, you get 323 homes, which is 21% of the home required energy. So they've used off-gem, fine. But what they have forgotten to point out is that this will only power the home if 80% of your energy is coming from other sources like gas or oil, etc. And of course, in none of these forecasts, in none of these claims, is any idea of having to replace the gas with electricity like heat pumps and so on. There is no element of that in the planning, nor is there any element of having EVs for your transport. But you may have heard of the magic money tree. Our politicians certainly have. Just listen.
But there isn't a magic money tree. It's a magic money tree. That there was no magic money tree.
The government shook their magic money tree this week to find a £1 billion bung for Northern Ireland. So can we have an urgent statement from the Chancellor when that magic money tree will blossom again?
So from my recollection, it's this side of the
But not to worry, I have some news. Yes, there must be a magic energy tree. Otherwise, we'd be led by absolute idiots who don't understand anything. So there must be one. Now turning our attention to wind farms, I'm going to start with an ITV. That's a mainstream television channel here that pushes the green propaganda all the time. I'm going to start with their calculations on how many homes wind turbines can supply. It's really an amazing bit of logic, and I can't help but admit I'm going to enjoy this next bit of analysis. So they answer the question, how much power does a wind turbine produce? How reliable are they? Well, let's look at how much power they produce and go through their logic, and here it is. How many homes can a wind turbine power? Good question. The energy used by every house in the UK is variable, that is true, but the average domestic electricity consumption rate for a home is 0.5 kilowatts or 500 watts. Well, that's a rate. Okay, that's a rate. So if you applied that to the day, which is half a kilowatt, you'd use 12 kilowatt hours a day. All 8 megawatt offshore wind turbines would generate 8,000 kilowatts when it's operating at its maximum capacity. Well, that's right. That's its maximum capacity, assuming it's at the perfect angle, the wind is blowing just at the right speed, not too low, not too high, just at the perfect speed, and it doesn't stop. It's 24 hours a day. So it would be able to supply 16,000 homes at a rate of 500 watts each. I pause because that is such a stupid statement. It takes my breath away. Maybe at this point it's fair to point out a few basic facts about UK energy. First of all, the electric supply, the grid, is only 20% of all the energy we need. I'm giving rough figures, to nearest decimal points, etc. About 20% of all the energy we need. The rest is in oil, in power, in your diesel, in your car, in gas, and sorts of all things, industrial processes, the lot. Now, this information I'm about to provide comes from the National Grid's website. Anyone can obtain it, of course. And it considers the year 2022 for what was produced from renewables. Well, wind accounted for 26.8% of the grid, which as a percentage of the total energy requirement for the UK is 5.36%, because we have to take 20% of it. The same for solar, accounted for 4.4% of the grid, and that gets reduced to 0.88% of our total energy requirement. Adding both together gives us 6.24% of our total energy is supplied by solar and wind today. And by the way, that solar power, at less than 1% of our energy requirement, uses 72,000 acres of land. The reason I've had to explain that and the actual contribution of the total energy mix is because you read rubbish all the time. This is some rubbish about the Hornsea 2 project, which is huge. It's the biggest offshore wind farm in the world, I understand. And if you look at what they're saying here, a decade ago, renewables made up just 11% of the UK's energy mix. So what they've done is conflate the total UK energy mix with just the grid, just the 20%. And of course, that's wrong. By 2021, it was 40%, with offshore wind the largest component. Now, I mean, they can't even distinguish between the total energy required for the UK, everything, and just the grid. And this is why I've had to explain in that preceding section the truth about what's going on. You literally cannot believe a single word printed in the mainstream media on almost anything these days. But on my subject, which is climate change, it drives me mad to see how these figures are conflated all the time, how journalists don't understand the most basic things. They don't even understand the difference in a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour, many of them. And mind you, I found the actual solar farm people didn't understand that. So this is why I'm having to explain far more than one would normally do in a video, to expose just how fundamentally wrong the rubbish you're being fed is. This here is the sort of rubbish where people use comparisons that are meaningless. Here we find out that 75,610 gigawatt hours, that's good. We actually know an amount of electricity there, it's gigawatt hours, and from offshore and onshore wind, that's great to know. This would be enough to power 8.4 trillion LED light bulbs. But how much does an LED light bulb take? It's meaningless. There's all different sizes of LED light bulbs. So it is totally meaningless thing. But the people doing these things for you, the people doing these translations for you in the newspapers and in the television, don't understand what they're doing. And they give you meaningless things and mislead you. And my job is to try to bring science and technology to everybody and to explain the truth behind all this. That's all. I'm always happy to be proven wrong. So we now need to find just how efficient wind power is. What proportion of the stated turbine capacity do we on average get out per annum? And here are the figures here. So in the perfect world that does not exist, of course, if you simply multiply that output rate of 28,500,580 megawatts as a rate, you have to multiply that to find out how much that will produce in a year, and then look at the actual we get out. So this actual figure there is 79,493,362 megawatt hours. The first is not megawatt hours, the second is megawatt hours. We have to convert the first to megawatt hours, and this is our next calculation. So there is this simple calculation. We basically take the rate of perfect production, if you like, the theoretical rate, multiply it by the number of hours in a year, which is 24 times 365, to get out how many megawatt hours in a perfect world it would produce, and then compare it to the actual, put one over the other, and the actual is 31.84% of the theoretical. So on average, we can get 31.84%. This is going to vary from wind farm to wind farm quite a lot because wind conditions vary. And for example, onshore wind farms would give less than that generally. Offshore would give maybe more. But the average overall is 31.84%. I think it's best to take the biggest wind farm in the world, apparently, which is Hornsea 2. It consists of 165 Siemens Gamesa 8 megawatt turbines. And it claims that its output, that 1.3 gigawatt output, can power more than 1.4 million homes. So let's check that out. Just so you know, they get that 1.3 gigawatts by simply multiplying out the 165 8 megawatt turbines. These are made by Siemens, and that's important, as you'll see. So the claim is 1.3 gigawatts rate of production services 1.4 million homes with their power. But we know it's 31.84% of that to get the efficiency, because the wind's not perfect all the time, etc., which means it's 0.4082 gigawatts. That's the rate. So that rate is meant to supply the 1.4 million homes. In a year, the 0.408 it times 24 times 365 equals 3,575.8 gigawatt hours, which is 3,575,800 megawatt hours a year. And using the Ofgem 14.9 megawatt hours per home for the year, we get 239,986 homes. Divide that by the 1.4 million already claimed, and the truth is it's 17% of the claimed houses. They're only 83% wrong there. And really you should be using the higher rate, not the 14.9 rate. You should be using the higher rate of 18.65, which is more akin to modern usage per year, and in that case you get down to 13.6 of the claimed homes. I'm not going to carry on with more examples. I've just taken the biggest wind farm in the industry and driven down into the data to provide you with how extreme these answers are. Now, the very turbines that powered that huge wind farm were made by Siemens, Germany. And those very same turbines have caused so many problems that they've caused one of the biggest losses ever in industry of $5 billion on faulty wind turbines. So there's been huge problems. But besides that, the offshore wind farm industry has now demanded a 250% hike in the price of offshore wind in order to continue. So the truth is that offshore wind is pretty well dead in the water. It does not have a future. We may all pretend it does, but at the prices that it needs to keep going, it has no future. Now, from the alarmist, you'll hear stories like, we can solve this with storage. You can't. There is no viable storage solution for the wind and solar. There really isn't. But then people say, what about waves? Again, that's my own subject as a water resource engineer. And well, let's just look at what happened on a famous wave experiment, the Snake. I think it was up in Orkney. And let's see what happened over the last few years with that wild scheme. Reported in 2018 as a breakthrough result in wave energy. It was praised with programmes on the BBC and elsewhere. So just what happened to this great project? Well, there it is. Orkney's sea snake wave energy generator is to be scrapped. The first offshore wave machine to generate electricity into the UK grid, which was deployed off Orkney, is to be sent to the scrapyards. One of the Scottish Government's great ideas. Let's just look at the story behind it. The Pomporis wave, known as the sea snake, was installed in European Marine Energy Centre in 2004. At the time, ministers hailed the installation as a vital milestone. I'd agree with that, for the wrong reason, but I'd agree. In Scotland's drive to become a world leader in harnessing sea power for renewable energy. The semi-submerged machine, which was originally included 5 connected red tubes, was expected to generate 3 megawatts of electricity. I can tell you now that's been exaggerated anyway. Enough power to power 2,000 homes. That's rubbish. By converting the movement of waves into energy. But the company went into administration in 2014 and the device was bought by the island's council because they could run it better than the company, of course. So they bought it for £1 3 years later. After failing to find a use for it, the council will spend $150,000 to send the 1,350-ton machine to scrap. James Stockton, the council leader, said at the time of the purchase the device was symbolic of the industry, and that if it was junk, the critics would have said, you should have kept that for something. Oh yeah, let's just keep it on. Last month, Gareth Waterson, the council's director of enterprise, said it had spent £45,000 maintaining the machine. It has been a bit of an albatross, he admitted. That story reminds me of a dinner I had after I'd left the water industry and had my own business. And at the dinner, there were just 3 couples, I think 6 of us. And one of them was the finance director of the Water Authority at the time, of the Water Board at the time. And I said to him, I'll tell you what, I reckon I can save you 10 million. And all you have to do is give me $1 million. That sounds good, doesn't it? I was joking. I was tongue-in-cheek. And he said, OK, Paul, what would you do? And I said, I wouldn't spend the 11 million you're now spending on buying hotels. You're buying hotels, failed hotels, of people who struggle to run them. And you think, with all the bureaucracy, etc., you can run them better. And reminds me of the Orkney Council there. Councils can't run businesses. In fact, they can't run much things at all. Governments can't run businesses. They don't understand it. They really, really don't. And, you know, they just... these days with net zero have got such a powerful weapon in their hands to control our lives. We can't let it happen. But one more thing, I'll finish off technically. The wind and solar farms are paid, green energy is paid for at the source of generation. That's normal in the past because your coal power and your gas, well, you know how much power is coming out, the transmission is big and we don't make much losses, 1 or 2%. But in actual fact, it can be as high as 17% for wind and solar farms because we have, if you like, a thin distribution liner where they have to connect up to the grid. It may be 10, 15, 30, 40 miles away. So they have to connect to the grid. And so there are quite considerable losses before it gets to your home, before it gets into that. And I haven't even allowed for that in all these figures. Probably upset the alarmists with hard facts and figures. Well, I'm not really sorry for upsetting the alarmists. I hope they are upset because let them counter it. Let them come and discuss it with me. Let them write in the comments where I've made the mistakes, where I'm wrong. I would love it. And if I am wrong, I actually was on one video. I had a figure wrong a few videos back and I openly declared it when I found out into the comments below the video. It didn't really change the point, but nevertheless, that's what I do. Anyone who doesn't admit they're wrong occasionally is nuts, and I'm happy to do that. I don't think I'm wrong in any of this, and if anyone points it out, great. So there we are. Basically, all it comes down to is this. You can forget the facts and figures. All it comes down to is this. The industry only tells you what it can provide to replace the electricity and not the gas, oil, and all the other things that you use in your domestic dwellings. So in doing that, they're missing out 80% of the energy. They're trying to do away with oil. They're trying to do away with the gas. It would really reduce it. It would cost millions in lives for a start. But, it would reduce us to pre-industrial levels. It would kill people. It's that bad. And it has to be exposed. So my MP actually, of course, dismissed me with these facts and figures as a conspiracy theorist. You know, I hate conspiracy theories, although I think there are conspiracies going on today, and that's new for me. I've had to just accept it because the evidence is becoming overwhelming. We can't carry on with this net zero. We just can't do it. No one is really doing the maths and the figures here to back up anything. You know, what is going to replace it all? There's no allowance, for example, for the increasing electricity demand in a home for EVs. You know, there's no calculations. So you meant not to buy them? Well, they're so expensive, most people can't afford them anyway. So maybe that is the plan. I could ramble on like this for ages, but I'm going to cut it short now and say thank you very much for watching. Please comment, please share. You know, we are getting bigger numbers now. I've added a lot to the subscriptions in the last month. So please share it and do your best to get the message out there. You know, someone, please argue with me. Bye.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. So here I am, on the latest stage of my GB Energy Tour, and I'm near Mansfield at the Lyndhurst Wind Farm. Now, these turbines behind me provide power for 5,000 homes.
No, they don't.